Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today we are going to be talking about something that is close to a lot of people's hearts in the UK, specifically in the UK, because we're going to be talking about the challenges that the NHS have with cybersecurity. There have been a number of breaches over 2024 and going back as well, many of which have been NHS issues, be it with technology or maybe ransomware attacks or any other kind of security related issue that's bobbed up that's caused them significant problems in trusts, or what we call trusts, all around the UK. But obviously, we have seen a number of other issues with US healthcare as well, which is not just consigned to the UK. But let's just talk about the UK for this particular episode, and maybe we'll do an episode about the wider threats and the wider concerns that we have. But without further ado, let me introduce you to some of my guests that I have here today to talk about this particular problem. And here today to discuss some of the challenges that we face within the NHS from a cybersecurity perspective, and we are going to stick to the cybersecurity perspective because from a lot of people's view in the UK, the NHS has a lot of good and bad things about it. We have some of the sort of specialists who've worked within that space, and obviously we have the returning co-host in the form of Richard Cassidy. But before we go over to Richard to introduce himself, let's do our guest who's here for the first time, Robert Priest. Robert, would you like to kind of introduce yourself to the people out there, who you are, what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Great to be here. So yeah, as you mentioned, the name's Rob Priest. I work alongside Richard currently at Rubrik. Have been for about 3 years, but prior to that, worked in the NHS for about 24 years. Before that, so as a student and throughout my career, different roles within the NHS, ultimately landing in IT leadership and some cyber roles as we go through. But I'm quite fortunate in my role at Rubrik here that I'm helping many NHS organisations understand adverse impact brought on by cyber events and put steps in place to kind of minimise the impact of those as much as possible. And we see kind of that trend continuing now, the threat increase as well as the digital adoption of systems in NHS as well. So good to be here.
Absolute pleasure to have you here, Rob. And Richard.
I'm the CISO at Rubrik. Work closely with Rob. Rob does a lot of wonderful things across public sector, but his real experiences and background is NHS. And Rob's been at various events, speaking on stage, very thought leadership topics. And he and I got talking about the state of NHS and, as a result of the disbandment of NHS England, what's the kind of net effect? Why are we still seeing NHS being a prime target by nation states, by cyber criminals? And we thought, got to get you on this podcast, Rob, because you've got a great deal of know-how and experience. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. So let's set the scene, shall we? You'd have to be living under a rock in the last couple of years not to have seen some of the media attention that there's been around the attacks on the healthcare sector, really. And it's not just, let's be honest, it's not just the UK. There's been some significant ones against US companies as well. Obviously, they will operate very differently from the NHS, but we're seeing attacks directly on NHS organisations. We are seeing attacks on the supply chain to those significantly as well. And they seem to be pretty indiscriminate. Some of them are trusts, some of them are children's hospitals. I mean, it seems to be pretty bad in that space when it comes to some of the stuff that we're seeing. And of course, who couldn't mention, I believe it was breaking news today, or recent breaking news, that obviously the UK are going down their own resilience kind of door, and there's 2-esque style of the way that they want to try to get organizations to handle their security. And they're threatening 100k fine a day. And I mean, something for an NHS trust in that kind of fine is going to be catastrophic. And it's going to drive up a lot of care costs, and obviously the bill that the general public are going to have to pay in order to not only recover from issues, but also deal with the fines and deal with the PR problems and so on and so forth. As we all know, when incidents kick off of any nature, it's not just direct fines you have to worry about. You've also got recovery and a lot of other stuff you need to worry about as well. But that's enough from me, because we've got you, Rob, and you are the man who knows this kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on kind of what the current events are? What are you hearing from other people in your space, maybe still in the NHS, some of the people that you still talk to, some of the CISOs, some of the security analysts, professionals? I mean, what's the general state of play when it comes to cyber criminals specifically attacking the NHS?
It's crazy when you think about it now. If I rewind and look at my former self 15 years ago, and you were talking about Russians and kind of state-sponsored ransomware as a service, I was like, no, our biggest risk is the flood in the data center. It's a fire in the data center. It's accidental deletions of files or patches gone wrong, and then all of a sudden we got this risk. So it just kind of shows that the risk we now face have evolved massively. But in parallel with that is our dependency on digital systems. Now, a further walk down memory lane, my first job in the NHS was in the medical records library. So, I mean, paper case notes. And I always kind of drop in a movie reference in my talks I do with Richard and so on. And if you've seen Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, do you remember that film?
Yeah.
The closing scenes where they put the Ark in that wooden crate, and then there's that old guy pushing the trolley down into that big warehouse full. Effectively, I worked in a version of that for case notes, and every patient had a set of case notes, and that was the single copy of that. So when they was attended to the hospital, that single copy of case notes had to go to the clinician so they could see that patient's history, blood tests, diagnostic results, and so on. So it's like very much a one-to-one relationship. And my job, 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. every single day, was I sat near a fax machine, believe it or not, again, what nostalgia again. The fax machine went off and said, patient's been admitted to A&E, emergency department for Americans listening here, with a car accident or whatever it may be. We need the records. It was my job to go and get them and run to A&E with them so people can make informed decisions with that data. Again, when I think about the risks and threats that we had then, it was very much, we needed really good fire suppression. All the shelves with the case notes on there were off the floor in case of flood, because obviously we wanted to make sure those records that were maintained in integrity. But obviously most NHS organisations, fast forward now, have digitised that record so that multiple clinicians can access it at the same time and get faster data in and data out of that. But we still have the same risks. If that data is unavailable to the people who need it when they need it, it's still a problem, which equates to poorer outcomes for patients. Now, Jim, you talked about the fine per day. I think most people in the NHS would just regard that as a maybe secondary or a tertiary negative consequence. The primary one would be, how can we maintain a level of care and service to patients without the information we need, previous history, blood type, allergens, and so on. So that's where the kind of primary impact is. And we've seen that in the past 3, 6, 9, 12 months, where NHS England have taken the right decision, in my mind, in that they've actually publicised the impact of patients for outages of 3, 4 months and so on, because I think that's what we need to focus on, and maybe focus that we can't eliminate that impact, but we can probably put measures in place and improve our standing to minimise impact. So if you think about a 4-month outage like a pathology supplier had in central London, huge impact. If that's shortened to a month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, that has a tremendous benefit to the patients, thousands of patients, in fact, there. So that's the kind of space that myself and Richard have spent a lot of time talking to NHS customers and suppliers of NHS services recently. Less so prevention, more so about minimise impact of events should they happen.
Fantastic. Richard, any comments on any of that you spring to mind at the moment?
I mean, what are the general challenges NHS follow from a cybersecurity perspective? I mean, clearly legacy infrastructure is a big challenge. A lot of NHS trusts are running outdated systems. We know that. And there's all sorts of issues around kind of managing that, patching it, keeping it updated without disrupting critical services. And that's a real problem driver for NHS because a lot of these legacy tool sets, we're unable to update them because they're certain types of medical equipment, for example. And then you layer on top of that supply chain risk. NHS relies significantly on third parties for, medical technology, digital records, and even IoT from some of the big IoT vendors, again, in the medical field. So there's a bigger risk there, I think, from less secure and in many cases legacy unsecured vendors. They're kind of two key things. And there are other points around, workforce gaps, but I think that exists across the industry as a whole. But then the government aren't helping either, in my opinion, because there's now fragmentation on the horizon post the NHS England disbandment. Disbanding NHS England into smaller structures may ultimately decentralize responsibility and budget. Now, that could be a good thing, because I think different NHS trusts, in my experience, they all have similar challenges, but some are very specific to that trust. It does suggest to me that there's a potential for a weakened coordination of cybersecurity. And then you say, okay, well, let's look to the NCSC to support this. But then the NCSC, have active cyber defense programs. They have NCSC CAF. How well are these being adopted? Do the people at these NHS trusts really understand how to adopt and implement? Is it really an active thing that's going on and more of a passive tick box exercise that they're trying to get through? So there needs to be better joint working between the NCSC and NHS Digital, NHS England as it exists, in my opinion. And there are four kind of key points, and I really love Rob's view on all or any of them, because these are the conversations I'm having, at least at the security level, Rob.
Yeah. Well, let's look at, about 213 NHS trusts. So they're the secondary care organisations you go to for A&E, outpatients, impact. How many of those would you guys suggest have a CISO working for them directly?
Oh, 5.
I was going to say less than 10%. It's in that.
It's more than 5, but it's probably like 10, 15%. So there's a gap, there's a void there, isn't there? Like if you look at that in terms of function, that function and that void could be filled by NHS England going forward, or some of the kind of regional structures. But we're going to see now, as we saw with NHS Digital merge with NHS England 2-3 years ago, that's another, that there's going to be a period of stagnation. There's going to be a period of people that are probably more worried about their own careers rather than innovation or security outside of the boundaries. And there will be brain drain as well. So people have this period of uncertainty. Is my job going to be here in a year or two? They'll probably take matters in their own hands and probably just decide on their own terms to leave, to go to another organization. So there's probably some impacts there. But legacy tech, I could talk about this all day from personal experience. IT teams and security teams are in a sticky situation sometimes. I work for a very big NHS organisation, 10 hospitals in total. Each hospital had their own procurement methods. They had their own needs, like different specialties. Historically, it wasn't so well gated that a clinician who fancied a piece of software that was linked to medical advice, as Richard said, or some other functionality, could just go out and buy it. And there was no one really with the authority to kind of challenge that. We had later technical steering groups and so on that were affected to a point with that. But we just had to deal with whatever was bought at a certain point. And sometimes part of these procurements, there wasn't really a good contract or an SLA about patching, about compliance with certain standards. I could probably count on probably 2 hands, maybe more, how many pieces of software which were integral to the care of patients, to the trust I used to work at, that the company didn't even exist anymore, because it was written by a small band of operators that they just shut up shop. But yet this piece of software, which is running very critical stuff, was still in use. And we just had to wait for those products to life cycle out or something be released that was better, and then it'll be replaced there. So I think things have got better in that sense, but we just have to be mindful that we can't deal with a legacy tech debt instantly. Sometimes it's a prolonged phased out approach, and then lessons learned from previous failed procurements or strategies, and to put them in place at a certain point to make sure the same mistakes aren't made again.
It's a difficult one, because it's like, looking at government posts and government positions and looking at NHS positions and posts that crop up in my feed from time to time. It's pretty evident they don't pay as well as a lot of commercial environments pay. Attracting good kind of information security talent, CISO talent, that kind of thing must be a significant challenge for them. And then there's the massive challenge, and it's something that Richard pointed out, and you kind of covered a little bit with the legacy tech. Being a a taxpayer myself and looking at the news when I believe, there were many aborted attempts at updating the NHS technical systems. I think it went through about 2 or 3 different integrators who all got payouts, by the way. They got the full thing paid out when they stopped bothering to do it. This kind of leads to a whole mishmash of infrastructure that's been kind of pulled together with, tape and string from different environments with different people who are trying desperately to do the right thing, do the job, and bring new kind of cloud technology and virtualization and so on and so forth, but all with different ideas that change every time a new integrator comes in, who's let's face it, they're always the cheapest of the bidders as well. So, they don't really have an incentive to put as much effort in as maybe some of the other plum contracts that they have, which are worth significantly more. And I've seen that time and time again when I consult. We've seen it with councils, we've seen it with postal services, we've seen it with all kinds of different organizations that but it's hard as a taxpayer to hear, the NHS is very bloated bureaucracy and it spends all of its money on rubbish. And it's like, well, where's the budgets for InfoSec are very, very tough to get as a general rule anyway, unless you've had a big security incident. And the NHS has the added thing whereby they don't have big budgets. They've got a lot of wastage. They've got a lot of aborted technology and technologies, you say, that's been written by a small company, but they didn't escrow the code. They didn't, you know what I mean? They didn't take some basic security measures to ensure that they would still have access to things, if they go awry, if the company goes under and all the rest of it. Then when you look at the RFPs, as a business owner myself, they ask for all these guarantees and stuff. And it's like, look, it's a big mess. We need much better IT. Obviously, there's a lot of other challenges they face. I mean, we can't even get nurses, for Christ's sakes. I know my mum was a nurse. I've got friends who are nurses and doctors and what have you. And just trying to get people alone to go and work at the NHS is a significant challenge. But I can't imagine what it's like to be an InfoSec in the NHS, because you're sat there going, where the hell do I start? Because where I would normally start, say Richard would start with when he first joined Rubrik or any company that he joins, it's not the same. It's a different environment. It's got different challenges. What are your thoughts? I mean, that's a very long readout from me, and I know we've got very limited time, but what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Rob raised a good point, and to answer your question around, are we learning lessons? And you're right, every organization will have their nuances, although I think there's a common theme here. So are we learning lessons? I think only partially and dangerously slowly. And I'm going to use a very old attack because, it depends on when people listen or watch this podcast as to what the data is. But let's go back to WannaCry, right? 2017. It hit over a third of NHS trusts, and it led to about 20,000 cancelled appointments. And we can fast forward to last year, to the chilling attack on Guy's and St. Thomas's, with the organisation that provided services for blood to this hospital. And again, that had a knock-on effect, okay? The attack against WannaCry and many others like it exploited known vulnerabilities for which patches have been available, but the NHS Trust hadn't rolled it out. And, that should have been the turning point, shouldn't it? And yet here we are in 2025, and we've got many of the same structural weaknesses. And, again, what happened after WannaCry was good, right? I say good, it depends on how you look at it. The government committed about 150 million over 3 years to improve NHS cyber resilience. Good. So cyber resilience, that is absolutely, I fundamentally believe, where every organization should be. And that is not a Rubrik pitch. That is a genuine cybersecurity, like hand on heart want, because we know we're not going to prevent, right? We all agree with that. So let's build a response capability that withstands the storm. But anyway, so this 150 million sounds impressive, but let's break that down. That's about 1.5 million per year per trust. Probably a bit more now because there's more trusts around. Sorry, a bit less. So, and most of it was actually spent on central services and assessments, if you look at the facts and figures, not directional operational upgrades. And so we're not running quickly enough, and the consequences are real. And here's one story that really is personal to me. In 2022, there was a ransomware attack on the third-party provider behind NHS 111. And that disrupted emergency care across England. I was working in South East Coast Ambulance at the time, in an ambulance on the front line. I'm a paramedic, and I know people know that in my spare time. And we had to go back to open radio calls for dispatch and updates to patients. And I want to give people some example of just how important tech is. When an ambulance gets dispatched to a job, let's say, James, God forbid, you complain of chest pain, and we get sent to you on blue lights. We have your medical history up on our MDT system, okay, our mobile data technology system. So I can see your doctor's history, the patient history. So before I get to you, I kind of know what I've got to do and what we're dealing with. Obviously, things change when you meet the patient. We had none of that for that entire blackout. We were missing. There was confusion between which crews were dispatched where, and actually ultimately led to some really serious outcomes for some patients. It was insane. So I was on the front lines when that occurred, and it wasn't the first time, and I don't think it will be the last. So the outcome of that was the government released strategy documents, because we're talking about learning here, right? And there's the cybersecurity strategy for health and adult social care. So 23 to 2030 is when that kind of covers. And it talks about building cyber maturity, improving resilience, establishing a unified framework. But strategies don't stop at ransomware, right? Implementation does. And implementation is still left to individual trusts, many of which lack funding, staff, and in-house cyber capability. And look, the UK healthcare sector is still one of the most attacked sectors in the country, according to the NCSC. They're not my figures. And 80% of those attacks, again, according to the NCSC, are linked to phishing or credential compromise. So we know how the attackers are getting in. We know what they're targeting. It's not a mystery to us. So why are we closing the gaps? And I fundamentally believe, and my last point before I hand over to Rob, is we need to treat these things as clinical issues, because that's when we take it far more seriously at a healthcare level than just IT issues. And I'll pause there.
And on the clinical issues, so there's organisations that have, you just mentioned, Richard, have been impacted by that. And a phrase I hear quite a lot is the organisations that understand the impact of events the best are the ones that have actually gone through it. Like, my question is, does that have to be the case? Could we not put the effort that we normally put into business cases and articulating benefits in the reverse of that, and looking at adverse situations and then forecasting the potential impact for this NHS trust or a group of NHS trusts should a key service be unavailable for a number of time? And that's a bit of work I've done with quite a lot of our customers now, is kind of applying that logic, like the what if scenarios. If your pathology system's unavailable for 4 months, what does that mean to you as an organisation, to patients, and how does that disrupt care? Because there are metrics available, you can quite quickly model that out. Because it was Ollie Whitehouse in a recent talk, who's the CTO of NCSC, he was talking about, we have optimism bias. And I completely agree with that. And I've seen it so many times in business cases I've been part of in the NHS, that we're very good at saying, we need to do this transformation because it's going to free up clinician time by 2 hours a day or whatever it may be. And that builds a case for change. But I don't see that being done as well when it comes to talking about potential impacts and then gathering the support, funding, the resources available to kind of put this appropriate mitigations in place, which is sad, because the frameworks that Richard talked about, CAF, DSBT, they have those outcomes clearly spelled out. Do you understand the adverse impact to your essential function, and so on? So it's just kind of, I think people need a bit more support to kind of actually execute those outcomes and understand that.
And you make a good point, actually. And it is a good question. I mean, do you think that cybersecurity has suffered at the hands of government mandates for things like reducing time for patients to get seen and so on and so forth, where there's been significant effort put towards doing what the government is telling them to do, which is make it cleaner, make it more efficient, make it faster? Whereas security, I mean, have they mandated at any point, other than obviously the one that Richard sort of brought up, an importance on security? Or do you think that's going to come down the line? I mean, let's face it, 2024, there were some serious howlers in the NHS sector and adjacent, with the service providers to that environment. And it wasn't just them, it was wider government as well. Do you think the government are starting to wise up now that the cheapest is not always the best? You need good cybersecurity resilience, but you need to fund it as well. And whilst, yes, it's important to get down waiting times and to make sure that, you've got capacity and so on and so forth, that you also need to protect that key data as well. What are your thoughts on that?
if I go back to my CISO comment, and I think this is where the opportunity has been missed. So there are targets that NHS organisations have been set by UK government, and I think justifiably so. So one of which is EPR. So it's an acronym, Electronic Patient Record. And there's a target for all NHS trusts to have an electronic patient record by March 2026. Now, most of them are on their way to do so. I think there's like 14% that need to execute on that. And now these systems, I know firsthand, they can cost hundreds of millions of pounds to do and adopt, because you deal with a legacy data being imported, new systems and training and so on to be put in. And I think that's where the opportunity is missed, that we're racing towards these targets, but with the absence of a CISO and other kind of personnel there, they're probably not asking the question, what about the security and resilience of that, to get on board that business case, a section of that funding to ensure that it is fully secure, it's as resilient as possible. Because, like I say, that is a missed opportunity. And Richard, I know you probably have feelings about that as well.
I couldn't agree more. But I think there's a lot of missed opportunities with NHS across the board. I think the government play a large part here, to kind of continue the point you're making, Rob. But to put it on the government, the government has a moral and strategic obligation to defend the NHS, in my opinion. And not just defending it from underfunding, because that's a big problem for it, but from the attacks that directly threaten patient safety. We've had all the warnings. I've talked about some of them, but the 2024 Cyber Security Resilience Bill, and there was 4.2 million investments in NHS Cybersecurity. That's just not enough.
No.
But what government, in my opinion and experience, and having had conversations with CIOs of ambulance trusts and various others across NHS trusts, stop putting the burden on individual trusts would be one of the common themes I hear. But to your point, Rob, it's difficult when those trusts don't have the right level of cyber leadership that they need. So that's something that could be better supported. And James, to your point, the funding isn't there because it's not an attractive enough position because of salaries. So that can be something that can be resolved, right? That there can be the right banding for cyber defense leads, CISOs, to kind of help attract them into that role. But, expecting every trust to independently defend itself against these sophisticated, often nation state-backed threat actors is unrealistic. And I think we need a federated model, right? A centralized threat intel and rapid response, which is not just on the NCSC shoulders. I think we need something new and more aptly focused on in NHS trusts. Much better shared cyber services, better shared detection, shared monitoring. Now, I know that the Cybersecurity Resilience Bill is talking about this. It's going to take some goodness out of the things like NIS2 and DORA from the EU. But there's nothing really written in at the moment that's going to how we're going to do that. And national coordination. And I know NCSC play a big role in this. And we have the COBRA, response efforts when things get really bad. But we need expert augmentation. The NCSC have recently been inviting vendors from across a wide range of disciplines, not just cybersecurity, to come around the table as part of a think tank to help discuss how we solve these problems better. And that's a great start. But expert augmentation should also be services provided by the latest and greatest sort of security resilience vendors who understand, Rob, because the conversations you're having with organizations is how do they build those resilience architectures? How do they look at their data better to find the things that are going to bite them hard? Not every NHS trust knows this stuff. And so it's up to the government to waterfall that down, in my opinion. So I'm continuing what you're saying, and I agree. And there's some ideas of the things that I think we should be doing better for NHS trusts.
I mean, I totally agree with what you said there, and my producer keeps telling me, stop agreeing with everybody. But, as InfoSec professionals, because we like a bit of conflict, apparently. I'll be honest, I'm going to be really horrible to a group of people now. And I apologize to the people in there. Look, I think there's a lot of good InfoSec people in various different parts of government, but the government themselves couldn't find the security behind with both their hands. Let's be honest. They don't know what they're doing. They're completely useless, and they're mandating the craziest and stupidest of things. And let's be honest, a lot of the people they're bringing in to advise them are obviously not advising them particularly well, because they've said a lot of howlers over, we're going to regulate the internet. Good example. Good luck with that. That should have been done, a long time ago. Saying that in the late 2000s, you've missed the boat there rather significantly. And I do believe, and I do agree with you, Richard, if we look at the standard principles behind InfoSec, knowing your assets, knowing what your key assets are, obviously we've got the data aspects and the private records of all those individuals. If that is such a big crown jewel, there should be a centralized method of supporting, securing, and allowing NHS trusts who do regulate and should potentially regulate their own systems attached to that through standard API or standard kind of systems to be able to pull that information out. But rather than relying on individual NHS trusts to look after their own data, because there must be a hell of a lot of bloody replication. Robert with his fast and strong legs running around a warehouse trying desperately to find the right record whilst his face is melting in the same way that happened in the Indiana Jones film, because he's just got too much work to do. Come on, the NHS has never had I say the NHS, the people facilitating the NHS have never had particularly good ideas of how to handle their data, how to handle migration. We mentioned that before, We're getting kind of stuck in this old technological setup with known vulnerabilities, stuff that's out of support, which we look at as professionals and think, my God, we can't keep doing this. But I don't see a change because the government can't look after their own security. Let's face it, look at all the howlers they've done with other aspects of the public sector, let alone the poor old NHS. We all love the NHS, but we all understand, I think, and having worked in there myself, one of my first ever jobs was a porter in an NHS trust. So I know some of the cracks and fun that comes with that as well, working on labour ward and all the rest of it. Those nurses are so busy trying to figure out what they're doing when they're doing it and, looking after patients. They don't have as much time as standard employees do in normal organisations to do security awareness training. Biggest focus of their position, they're saving lives. In some cases, they're, like yourself, Richard, you're out in the field and trying desperately to stop somebody from passing away or bleeding out in a car accident or whatever. The last thing you're worrying about is whether you're clicking on a fish. Admittedly, you're probably not looking at your email when you're sitting there patching someone up, but you know what I mean. There's some significant challenges. I can't see how it can't be a significant challenge here.
Yeah, so one of the challenges you touched upon is the sheer number of people who work at an NHS organisation, like the one I used to work at, probably 34,000 people, because you've got some areas that's like the 3 shifts, 24/7. So you don't just have people you can capture in a 9 to 5 window for that training. It's the complexity of doing that across 3 different shifts that are incredibly busy as well. And all those people need devices to do their jobs. So the advent of more devices on the wards, like the workstation on wheels, tablets, and so on. That's probably another challenge of the NHS. If you look at the technology they've got, it's probably easy to list what's not in place in the organisation. So every type of operating system, every time, like the diversity of the technology that's within that, again, it proves to be a challenge to keep secure also.
I always try to look at it from what's really possible, because we're doing a good job here of highlighting what the challenges are, and we are talking about some of the solutions. But there was a great article in the British, I can't remember, I read it now, BMA, and it was a kind of British medical view of the cracks in the system. It was written at the very end of last year, and it highlighted sort of 5 core themes. It said, look, there's escalating cyber threats, we know that. And to your point, in children's hospitals, and we've used this term before, James, there's no honor amongst thieves. And the more critical the services you can impact, and Synovus was critical, but children's hospitals are morally more critical to the world, the higher likely it is you're going to get your payouts. So, there's an escalating cyber threat, we know that. There's vulnerabilities due to outdated systems, we've talked about that. And then there's the challenges implementing these measures. There's also the human factors, and that's the point you raised there, which I agree. There's an intense workload. As a paramedic, I use these electronic patient record systems on iPads. I know some colleagues, and I'm not going to mention which ambulance trusts because it's unfair, that share those iPads with the kids and they download all sorts. Now, there is mobile device management, but a lot of this stuff, can be bypassed. So, it's just the stress of the job and family life. You tend to just reduce your cyber hygiene practices as a result. With escalating threats, what can NHS do about it, or trusts? And I guess in my experience, and from working with Rob as well in lots of these organizations, just build cyber preparedness and into your clinical resilience. Have these incident playbooks and have digital redundancy planning. To Rob's point, if this system was affected for 4 months, 1 month, 1 hour, what would that mean? And I think we talked about this on a number of podcasts last year, James, where we talked about organizations don't tend to look at it from the customer side. They look at it from the business process side. But actually, as an NHS trust, your customer is the patient, and therefore, if Synovus had to ask the questions, what would happen if our services couldn't be deployed? What would happen to the patients we serve? Well, they would have realized that those systems were probably most uber critical. So, digital redundancy planning based upon minimum viable hospital or healthcare. Rob, I know we've talked about this concept as well.
Yeah.
Simulate real life cyber attack drills. Get people involved in what it feels like when an MRI scanner gets attacked and chooses a jump host for whatever. We have to coordinate this better as well. And there's not much we can do about outdated infrastructure, but we've just got to prioritize security by design secure by design in terms of upgrades there. So asset mapping and risk management based patching, so we know where our most critical assets are. We're trying to patch based upon that. And then this whole zero trust model, microsegmentation, that's nothing new to the industry. We really need to get better at that in healthcare. So, replace the worst, in my opinion, if it's in a real bad state, and shield the rest. And on the human factors part, I think the last part before I hand back to Rob on this, we always say make cyber hygiene a part of clinical safety, but in the reality, most breaches do start with people, not code. But I think we can flip that. What does work is bite-sized cyber briefings, like during team huddles. I would love, when I walk into hospitals sometimes, I see doctors do huddles around types of trauma or injuries or chronic complaints. And it's wonderful. You get all the nurses and doctors if they do get 5 minutes, it's not often, got an A&E consultant saying, right, so we have pancreatitis. So what are the top things you'd be looking for? How do we deal with it? Right, done. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we can enable our team leaders in HS to run these huddles around? Okay, so there's just been an outage of the system. So what's our fallback? What's our paper process? Do we have one? And that's what I mean. So these kind of bite-sized briefings would really help. And also use real life case studies. You don't have to make stuff up. There's no shortage of attacks and downtime and outages. And I think those are the impactful things that could really help. Rob, I don't know if you agree or disagree. Feel free to disagree, of course. That's fine too.
Well, I'm in the theme of agreeing with that, but I think I do agree, Richard. I think because we've very much been part of these talks with NHS organisations, haven't we? And I think focus on the practical steps organisations can take to understand the impact. That's one of the pillars of the UK government cybersecurity strategy was focus on the greatest risks and harms, and then that got adopted by the Department of Health and Social Care. And who understands the harms the greatest? It's the local organisations treating the patients. I think that's probably where we disagree a little bit. I don't think we can rely on the UK government to say that that's the impact for you. The trust has to kind of lead on that and understanding that. And the people that can help, breaking outside of the boundaries of cyber and IT, there are clinical safety officers. And where I've seen this really work well is when the clinical safety officers act as that conduit between the technical teams and the clinical people, just to suggest and build these scenarios. So looking at the case studies, and we're quite fortunate, Richard, in public sector, and to some extent, in that public sector organisations are better at publicising case studies from impact. So we've got the Health Service Executive, lots of local authorities up and down the UK have done this. And you can actually pick out the timeline of that incident and just replay that in the local organisation. Okay, the situation is this. Ransomware has been detonated. Dwell time, we think 14 days ago, etc. And it's how would we cope in this situation? How would we be able to recover? And really kind of elicit the evidence based on that real world situation with real metrics backing up. So for every week we're down, it equates to this amount of patients that are being impacted by that. So that's worked really well. And that has then enabled organizations to quantify the impact of certain situations, which is then said, we need to do something about this. they've got the appropriate resource and funding to then do something about it for that situation. It's quantifying the impact of situations that haven't happened, but could indeed happen because it's happened to comparable organizations.
So, Rob, I wouldn't mind just challenging on one of those points, because you're talking about, assess the impact and do all these wonderful things to understand what the risks are. But you've spoken to an awful lot more NHS trusts than I have. Is the problem systemic in the context that we have leadership problems in these NHS trusts that maybe don't quite understand how to articulate or understand that risk? Or is it a lack of capability? Is it a lack of competence? Because we're still, the news reports are still showing us that we're not getting it right. I do believe we're getting better, but what are you finding the decisions are being made easy, or they're hard to quantify from a board level decision making process? Is that, because I said earlier, is it legacy problems? Is it mindset issues? I mean, I know funding's a part of it, but who are we dealing with here?
I think the challenge is that this is one thread of multiple risks an organisation faces. Again, probably look at the NHS trusts up and down the country. How many of them are facing the need to replace buildings in the next 5 years because of crumbling concrete, asbestos? So boards are facing multiple things which are really real and tangible, like that building will need to be replaced in 5 years, otherwise it's going to fall down. Versus, I think cyber is sometimes, it's deemed as a risk, but it's a risk that might not happen versus certainties. So there's a way of kind of quantifying that, but then which is going to be more impactful to the organisation, quantifying a cyber attack and prolonged recovery if possible, versus like one building that needs to be closed. So I think sometimes people in these organisations aren't necessarily that great on articulating the risk in a format the boards can interpret. So quite common when we look at recoveries, people talk about RTOs and RPOs and in timeframes. Doesn't mean anything. You've got the traditional 5x5 risk matrix, which says, oh, this is a very likely impact, high. And again, that doesn't really mean anything because those 5x5 matrices are quite static as well. So I think there's works that could be done to make those processes a bit more board ready. And then the board obviously needs to have the accountability to kind of truly interpret that information. If they don't understand it, then ask questions of people to kind of really understand where do they need to focus their efforts for the next financial year. As an example, where did he put the resource in to deal, which is the biggest problem that needs to be resolved? And I think that's where an organisation probably could do better, because we've seen it when it's not fully understood and it happens. Again, go back to my previous comment, organisations who know the impact the best are the ones who have gone through it. We need to change that a little bit, I think.
I mean, my opinion is, and I'm looking at it from an outside in, and I've dealt with different trusts over the years when I've worked for different consultancies, bearing in mind, obviously, both of us have worked directly for the NHS. So we've had the horror and experience of what a board at the NHS looks like, what an NHS board actually looks like. And I'm guessing it hasn't greatly changed from when I was a kid. But I'm guessing they're not mandated to have an information security professional as advising them, or at least on the board, to take risks to physical and technological, all the stuff that we would normally do as InfoSec professionals now. They're not mandated to have somebody who's knowledgeable on the board.
No, there's an exception. So every trust should have a CIRO, Senior Information Risk Officer, that would have to sign off.
Who are those, though? Are they professional InfoSec or security people, or are they people that nobody knew what to do with and put them into the role because they need somebody in that role? It's controversial, but I have experienced that before.
The list is publicly available of CIROs for NHS Trust, and I can confirm I've gone through that, and a lot of them are finance directors that possibly just inherited the role in the absence of somebody else.
Finance, they'll understand financial risks, but they don't understand. The way I see it in a lot of these types of environments is there's a heavy reliance on the people that you shouldn't be reliant on, which is the integrators, because every one of these trusts has the lowest bidding integrator that's gone in. And I've dealt with those integrators. And I'm sorry if you're a member of the integrators, but I have very dim view on a lot of the talent and the retention of good talent of specifically security professionals in those institutions. And you do overcharge terribly on everything above and beyond what the contract says. About the only good thing that I think a lot of these integrators have, is very good lawyers and very good people who write the contracts. And I've been in situations where the integrator has said, yes, we can do all this for you, but it's not part of the contract. It's going to cost you another 20 million. I'm sorry, what trust is going to be able to do that? Some of these contracts also last for a hell of a long time, a lot longer than you would normally have commercially in the commercial world. And I just think we need to go back to basics. I think personally the best thing for our healthcare industry is to have a private set of IT teams, a private set of information security professionals, building out a universal infrastructure for the storage of critical data and the management of critical data, and then supporting local or NHS trusts in finding the best supplier, not based off of minimal cost, but maybe local suppliers. Why not? There's a lot of IT companies, there's a lot of other smaller consulting firms and what have you, who would put a lot more effort into supporting those trusts than you would ever get from a larger integrator, because they come with all the swish suits and they come with all the swish contracts, but they will only do what's in the contract. They have specific people, and I know this for a fact, specific people who look over every request. Is it part of our mandate in our original contract? If it's not, it's a change, and a change requires cost. I mean, I've caught one integrator, I'm not going to mention who they are because I've already criticised them enough, charging a customer of mine £30,000 a month to provide a security report that consisted of 5 pages, 2 of which were the title page for the report and the contents, and the rest of it was just either cut and pasted on a monthly basis, or they were just supplying the same one. I actually went and got 2 years worth of these reports. I was interested and went through them. And these are people who facilitate a lot of government contracts. And I don't think they changed it in like 6 months prior. There was like something added 6 months beforehand. 30 grand a month for a report. And if that kind of waste is happening with the NHS, you know what? Can it all? Well, maybe not straight away. Build central, get some centralized security for the critical functions for data, the protection of data and people's personal records, and then use that team to support those trusts in helping them build secure environments with whatever people they choose, giving proper guidance and mandates from that central group. You will secure your endpoints. You will ensure that any connections to our central store are through appropriate, secure technology using credentials. You know what I mean? I'm going on there. Am I talking complete crap?
I'm not going to agree. I'm not going to disagree. I'm saying, in part, centralized functions such as security makes sense completely. There are challenges to centralize systems across the NHS because some systems are very bespoke to the services each NHS trust provides. So there's some challenges there, but certainly there is scope to centralize some functions there for economies of scale and continued improvement for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially things like standard medical records that doctors would pull up to when the patient comes in. I mean, obviously, you've got MRIs, you've got all kinds of different technical equipment that is very bespoke depending upon the nature of the hospital, if it's a general trust or whether it's, they've got specializations. I mean, I know radiographers who've told me that some of the kit that they use is based off of operating systems that would make your eyes bleed if you actually looked at it and went, seriously, you're still using that? What do you see from kind of, the InfoSec people that you communicate who are still in the NHS? Are they belligerent? Are they exasperated? Are they frustrated? Or are they kind of, are they supported in what they do? What is it like to be in, sorry, I'm not turning anybody off the NHS, by the way, if you want to go as a career path as an InfoSec person in that, because maybe you can be the one to change it if it is what I suspect it's going to be. But what are they saying in general about their role, and how tough it is?
Obviously, it is a tough role. I think a lot of people I talk to are enthused by the ability to kind of enact change and make significant improvements. Sometimes having an estate that has some quite quick wins, and you can put some foundational measures in place. We got that rush of endorphins because we've done this and executed that, and therefore that's more secure. So I think there is the enthusiasm for that because people see a direct input to that. And going back to my career in the NHS, that yes, you mentioned the salary is probably not as good as private sector and so on, but there's probably no sense of ethical input. The morality of kind of working for even indirectly helping patient care is a huge motivator for a lot of people who work in the NHS, as it was for me as well. So you are correlating your input into something which is far bigger than just InfoSec.
Yeah, and there's a lot of very dedicated people in that industry, and you look at what a lot of those people are paid, and you can tell they're not there for the cash necessarily. They're there because they genuinely love the job and they genuinely want to help people. That was the case when I worked way back myself for Tunbridge Wells NHS, or Royal Tunbridge Wells NHS. They had just as difficulty as anybody else with a lot of systems. And you mentioned crumbling. The new Tunbridge Wells Hospital is built on the old Pembury Hospital, and I worked in the old Pembury Hospital, and my God, some of the buildings there, they probably should have been condemned years ago. So there is significant challenges.
You should see where some of the data centers I've had to run have been put in. Broom cupboards and so on. Going back to your previous point about, I have seen quite a lot of turnover in cybersecurity and InfoSec personnel within the NHS, that they've been in place for a year or two and they've just not got any traction with the strategy, that they've not managed to get the funding and so on. So you can only withstand that for so long before realizing I can't enact changes, and then they've rotated out to sometimes other NHS organisations, but sometimes other public sector organisations. I've seen that quite a bit over the past 2 years as well.
People don't take security seriously until it's already too late, till the horse has already bolted and you've already had an incident. And that's not just true with NHS and public sector organisations in the UK and around Europe and over in the States. That's also the case in the private sector as well. And unfortunately, it's usually the wake-up call that's needed for other institutions and organisations around in that sphere to suddenly stand up and go, we do have a problem. The problem you have with people like the NHS is it's institutions that have been around for a very, 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 very long time. Securing a new institution that's just rebuilding itself, or reformatting itself, or maybe it's building itself for the first time, is so much easier than it is with an organization that's been around for a long period of time, that's seen different evolutions of technology. I've worked for newspapers, for instance, where they've had that problem, like very old newspapers who are used to the old printing presses of the days gone by, and they've layered technology over the years, but they just haven't updated it. So the update path is just not there for. And you mentioned medical things. Well, you get that in the print industry as well. Obviously, the print industry is not as good as it was, but they've still got machines running off bloody Windows 95, which is horrendous to try to secure or even attempt to secure.
So your options are segmentation and isolation, and all of a sudden you're spending lots more money trying to make that happen rather than replacing that system with something else. Yeah.
But I honestly think this is important enough that we should probably reconvene and have a further discussion down the line, and we'll organise it with yourself and Richard, because we've just scratched the surface of some of the challenges that they experience, our brethren in the NHS experience. If you are in the NHS and you want to tell us what it's like anonymously, then please feel free to reach out via the various different means you have to myself, or Richard or Robert. I'm sure you can find us all on LinkedIn. You've also got the comments underneath, because it'll be interesting to see what you guys think who are at the coalface. Be you a nurse, be you a doctor, be you an admin assistant, be you an InfoSec professional. What's your view on the security of your own organisation? Because let's face it, I'm a Brit, you're a Brit. It affects all of us. I've got people close to me who need to go to the hospital on a regular basis. And I want to make sure it's as secure as it feasibly can be. So if you are in an NHS trust and you want some advice, you know what? Sod it. I'll give it to you for free. Not totally free, but I'll give you some really good stuff to get off with. Robert, any last thoughts on what we can do with this one, or shall we just think about it for next time and see what people come back with?
I think it'd be really good to bring on somebody who's an active CISO, InfoSec leader, cybersecurity leader in an NHS trust to hear those stories about how challenging it is for them to enact change and push through enhancements that they've identified are required as well. So I've got a few contacts I'll reach out to.
If there's 2 or 3 of you that want to kind of come on and have a conversation, then please feel free. We'll do a couple of them if needs be. We'll have you all on board. We'll do a feature length one, version of this. But thank you for your time, Robert. I know we literally just scratched the surface and what have you. And obviously, if any of you out there do have any comments, please feel free to put them down. If you're not comfortable putting them down in the comment section, a lot of people aren't. I get a lot of DMs because we're talking about InfoSec here, and some people don't want the exposure. Then please feel free to DM us, obviously, or email us. There's plenty of ways that you can find to get in touch with us. Just look in the description section if you're watching us on YouTube. Please feel free to like and subscribe. We're pushing content all the time. If there's anything you want us to cover or expand upon, and I'm guessing there's going to be a few people asking us for this particular topic, then please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to deal with it. But for the moment, look after yourselves, and we'll be speaking to you again soon. In addition, I do have a book recently come out, The Cyber Sentinel's Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of a lot of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.